We actually came up with 14 really strong recommendations, including, for example, that employers should have to develop decarbonisation plans with their
Sure.
own workforces. Not a single piece of that work has been taken forward. And I think, instead it's being, sacrificed on the altar of the
Yeah.
culture wars.
The Labour manifesto has two particular attractions for Britain's unions. It promises to implement in full what it calls its New Deal for working people, including ending 0 hours contracts, giving more power to unions, and enabling more flexible working arrangements. It also promises to create hundreds of thousands of new, well paid, probably unionised jobs through increased investment in a green revolution to achieve net zero carbon emissions. Labour claims to be both pro-business and pro-worker. But can it really be both? Let's speak to Paul Novak. He is the General Secretary of the TUC. Paul Novak, welcome. Let me begin with this. One leading employment law commentator, Darren Newman, says Labour reforms are, quote, the most union-friendly manifesto ever put forward by a party actually expected to win an election. It can't be that pro-union, surely, and still be pro-business.
Well, I think it absolutely can be, Andrew. And good afternoon, first of all. Listen,
Thank
we've
you.
got a problem. We've got a problem in the UK economy, and this is the problem as I see it. We've got, sort of wages no higher now than they were in real terms in 2014. We've got 1 in 8 people working on some sort of insecure contract, so on a 0 hours contract or on a temporary contract or through an agency. And that has an impact. I mean, 900,000 kids with working parents have gone into poverty since 2010. So for far too many people, work doesn't pay. And that's bad for workers, but it's also bad for the UK economy because those workers don't have security of employment. They don't have money in their pocket. So I absolutely think that Labour's New Deal for Workers is good for workers, but I think it'll also be good for Britain's businesses and it'll
All
be good for
right.
the UK economy as a whole.
Well, let's look a little bit about what Labour would do.
Yeah.
It plans to scrap all 0 hour contracts, and you've given one of the reasons why. But there are plenty of workers that actually like the flexibility of 0 hours contracts. Not all, but some. What about them?
Yeah, yeah, well, absolutely. So first of all, 0 hours contracts. Around 2/3 of the workers on 0 hours contracts in poll after poll said they'd rather have guaranteed hours. Now, there are some people who do like the flexibility of very short hours or no hours. What Labour's commitment will mean is that people will have the right to guaranteed hours that reflect the actual hours that they work. Now, that would mean, for example, if you're working 16 hours every week, each and every week, you'd be entitled to a contract for those 16 hours rather than your employer just giving you a contract for 1 or 2 hours and then saying, I might need you for the other 14. What it won't do is oblige anybody to work those 16 hours. So
I
those who want
see.
flexibility will still have it. But the
So,
crucial thing is for the million people who are on 0 hours contracts, they will have a right to a contract that actually
so
guarantees their hours. And that means they know at the end of the week how much they're going to earn, Andrew, and they
I
can plan their
understand.
lives and pay the bills.
So for the minority, and I think it is a minority, for the minority that would still want an equivalent or something like a 0 hours contract that they have now, that would still be okay, yeah?
Nobody is going to force workers to work hours that they don't
Okay,
want to work.
right. Thank you for that. That's an important clarification. Now, Labour will also abolish minimum turnout levels in strike ballots. So, in effect, strikes could be called on a minuscule vote. I mean, business leaders are going to see that as a strikers' charter, are they not?
Well, let's look at the laws around strike action. I mean, the government, the Conservative government, brought in the 2016 Trade Union Act. It brought in the minimum services level
Right.
legislation last year, which was designed to stop workers taking strike action. What we've seen over the last couple of years is that hundreds of thousands of workers, many of them often for the very first time, some of them very unlikely groups of workers to be taking strike action, people like physiotherapists and paramedics, people who don't normally take strike action,
Sure.
forced into taking strike action. And actually, you can't legislate out dissent, Andrew. And what this government is trying to do is ignore people's concerns at work. I
No,
think
but
what Labour are doing is saying, listen, what we need to do is reset
no, but
industrial relations in this country.
except that you can say, particularly if it's in the public sector where it could be major disruption of people's lives, people who have nothing to do with the dispute, that there has to be a minimum turnout to call a strike. I don't quite understand why that would be seen as undemocratic or I mean, in many constitutional countries, there has to be a minimum vote before you can do it. Why not with a strike?
We'll go to an election next week, Andrew. We won't set a minimum threshold for the vote that the politicians
No,
get,
no,
and we
but the
won't put
election's
we
not
won't
going
we,
to stop me
we
catching a train or switching my power off or
well.
inconveniencing vital or junior doctors going on strike, vital public services.
Well, I think if you look at the devastation the current government's imposed on the country over the last 14 years, the impact of that election will be very important.
Doesn't
But
answer my point, though, General
but the
Secretary.
key thing is this, Andrew, that no union member takes strike action lightly, and no union is going to take strike action where there clearly isn't majority support for that strike action.
So
But
why
what the
not a
current
minimum
well,
qualification?
what the current government have done is impose
No,
democratic hurdles that they wouldn't impose on any other type of ballot. And including for a fact, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when Liz Truss was our prime minister. Many of you, but she was elected by an
you didn't blink and miss it.
no, but she was elected by an electronic ballot of Conservative
Yeah.
Party members. Our members, when they voted in industrial action ballot at the moment, have to go through a postal ballot. I mean, it's incredibly
Right.
time-consuming and expensive, and actually,
Oh,
it doesn't address the real issues, which is trying
okay.
to address the underlying reasons why people feel we need to take strikes in the first place.
Let me ask you another question about this. Is Labour committed to what is now termed the right to switch off? In other words, that email the boss sent me at 11 o'clock on Saturday morning, I don't have to deal with that till Monday morning. Is Labour committed to that?
It's absolutely committed to sort of looking at how you can address the issue and how you can give people that right to disconnect, which is a right enjoyed by workers in countries including Ireland
Right.
and in France and elsewhere. I mean, I think you just have to be realistic about this. The expectation isn't that you would never have to answer an email outside of work hours or could never get a phone call from your boss. What the expectation is that it stops workers being routinely contacted out of hours. And we've got a problem in this country, Andrew, with workplace-related mental health and stress. Everybody that you talk to, whether you work in a warehouse, a school, in an office, a factory, people feeling the pressures of work are getting more and more
I
intense. And this, I
understand.
think, is a sensible measure to sort of try and
But
address those concerns.
but I'm unclear as to what it is that Labour is actually planning. Is it going to be a statutory right, or is it just going to be some kind of good practice guidance?
Well, certainly, I would like
Because
it to
it's
be.
not in the manifesto. It's not
No,
actually not mentioned in the manifesto.
well, I think that sort of that's something that will have to be consulted about. I mean, I'm very clear. I would love to see this put in statutes. I think there's a very strong argument for that. I think the key thing is that we have a right that is workable. That's workable for the people that we represent, is workable for employers as
Okay.
well. And all of this comes down to the fact that for lots of good businesses, this is the sort of stuff they do anyway. Most employers don't employ people on 0 hours contracts. Most people do give people sick pay from day one. Those good employers at the moment are being undercut by the cowboys. And I think what the New Deal does is level the playing field for good employers
Oh,
as well.
all right. Let me come on to jobs. Very
Yeah.
important. Rachel Reeves says her green investment plans will create over 600,000 well-paid jobs. Do you believe her? Is that really
Uh,
credible?
I think it is credible. And I think you only have to look over the other side of the Atlantic and see what the Biden administration has done with the Inflation Reduction Act. Huge amounts of public investment has attracted equally huge amounts of private sector investment, which precisely has gone into creating good quality and in many cases unionized jobs as well. Now,
Yeah.
in the UK, if you compare our experience, I mean, take offshore wind, for example, I mean, it's been an absolute boom industry. The numbers of good quality jobs actually created in UK supply chains have been very small. And I think you have to think not only about the investment, but how you make sure that you benefit UK supply chains, how you use public sector procurement effectively. What's happening on the other side of the Atlantic and indeed on the other side of the Channel.
All right. Well, you mentioned President Biden, the other side of the Atlantic. First of all, he has increased spending by tens and tens of billions. Actually, in some cases, hundreds of billions. That's why America's running such a massive deficit. And yet it hasn't created the equivalent of 600,000 jobs, which would, by American terms, be over 3 million new jobs. Now, let's come back to this side of the Atlantic. Labour is proposing not 28 billion a year, which it did at one stage, but under 5 billion a year in extra spending. How can you create all these jobs on such a small increase when so much of that investment will go into largely capital intensive projects?
Well, obviously that commitment to the £28 billion was torpedoed by the aforementioned Liz Truss and their crashing of the
Well,
UK
get to the
economy. But
jobs, get to the jobs.
yeah, so absolutely. So I'll give you a very practical example, Andrew. I was down just today in Brighton talking to Community, which is one of our steel unions. Labour have committed to £3 billion to support UK green steel. At the moment, the government is proposing to give Tata Steel £500 million in exchange for them making 2,000 steel workers redundant. I think a different approach from the Labour government, backed by some real cash, some real investment, could make a massive difference in steel, but also in offshore wind, in new nuclear, in automotive and elsewhere.
Yeah, but hold on. That will at best keep existing jobs. It won't create any new jobs in the steel factory. And I'm still trying to work out where these extra 600,000 are coming. Also, at the same time, how many well-paid jobs will be lost by banning any new oil and gas licenses in the North Sea? The Aberdeen Chamber of Commerce, which knows about these things, estimate tens of thousands of these jobs will be gone. Has the TUC done its own estimate on that?
We haven't done our own estimate on that. We're very clear, and I think our oil and gas unions are very clear, that those jobs need to be protected and secured, and a credible plan for transition to decarbonising our economy has to be on the table. And that's been certainly a feature of the discussions we've been having with Labour.
But Labour's going to ban any new oil and gas licenses.
But putting this in the context, Andrew, of a proper industrial strategy, which we don't have at the moment, there are huge opportunities to support the jobs we've already got in our energy intensive industries, for example. I mean, I want us to have a vibrant steel sector and a chemical sector and all the rest of it. But also think about new sectors of the economy, whether it is offshore wind, whether it's about the next generation of nuclear power, whether it's about retrofitting insulation in homes up and down the country, reforestation. There is a prize there in terms of secure, good quality jobs for decades to come.
Yeah. Well, except maybe not 600,000. Well, let me just put this to you, because I want to stick to the overall picture because it's important. Research by Aberdeen's Robert Gordon University, that also knows a thing or two about energy economics. It says investment in renewables, it could create not 600,000 jobs, that's fantasy, but 80,000 new jobs by 2030. But 60,000 would be lost in oil and gas. They're jobs we have at the moment, often unionized jobs, well-paid jobs. That's 20,000 net increase is not the bonanza Labour or Rachel Reeves is promising.
I don't think it's an either or, Andrew. We want good quality jobs in oil and gas, and we'll be reliant on oil and gas for years to come. We want also good quality jobs in the emerging sectors. And listen, it's not
how can we rely on it if we're not going to invest in it?
Well, I think even the current government. I mean, I'll give this government a little bit of credit. 3 years.
Careful now.
3 years ago, I sat on a thing called the Green Jobs Task Force, which Kwasi Kwarteng set up. That was involved employers, involved unions, involved a whole range of education providers and others. And we were tasked with thinking about how we could get to 2030 and create hundreds of thousands of good quality green jobs. We actually came up with 40 really strong recommendations, including, for example, that employers should have to develop decarbonisation plans with their own workforces. Not a single piece of that work has been taken forward. And I think, instead it's being, sacrificed on the altar of the culture wars. This is all greenery and wokeness. Actually, it's about the future of our industrial base in this country.
So let's finish with what two unions say. The GMB says this will be bad. Labour's plan to end licenses will be bad for, quote, jobs, investment and national security, because it hits security of supply. Unite, which I think is your biggest member, GMB is a very big member, I think Unite's your biggest one, it says quite simply, Labour's plans on this are, quote, not viable. Even your own members have got doubts about this jobs bonanza.
Well, I think our unions have been very clear that they're going to, they have got concerns about, no new oil and gas licenses without a very clear plan for a transition. And that's what we want from a Labour government, a very clear plan for a transition. Okay. And I think it's absolutely right for those unions. I mean, if you're talking to oil and gas workers in Aberdeen, it's no use telling them, don't worry, there'll be good green jobs in the future. They need a very clear plan about how they're going to support their livelihoods, their communities going forward. I think that's right of them to expect that. And I think that's what we'll be doing with the Labour government if we get one elected next Thursday, is sitting around a table, having a coherent industrial strategy and building that brighter future together.
All right. Paul Novak, thank you for coming on. I hope you come back. I enjoyed our
Absolutely, would love
conversation.
to.
Good. I'm
Cheers.
delighted to hear it. Paul Novak, they're the head of the TUC on Labour's labour market reforms and also its plans for jobs.